The crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light just as they had in the brochure, casting rainbows across the empty ballroom floor. I stood in the doorway of the Rosewood Manor, watching 300 white chairs arranged in perfect rows for no one. The wedding planner's voice cracked when she called my daughter. "Mrs. Patterson, there seems to be an issue with your contract." Behind me, I could hear car doors slamming in the parking lot, confused guests checking their phones, whispering about cancellations they'd never received. My granddaughter Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma Rose, why is everyone leaving?" I smoothed her hair and smiled. Some lessons, I thought, cost exactly what you're willing to pay for them. My name is Rose McKenna, and I'm 72 years old. For 50 years, I built something beautiful with my late husband Frank, a successful catering business that fed this town's celebrations, sorrows, and everything in between. I thought I'd taught my daughter, Claire, about loyalty, about family, about the weight of words once they leave your mouth. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was deadheading the roses Frank had planted the year before he died. My arthritis had been acting up, but those roses needed tending, just like everything else I couldn't quite let go of. "Mom, we need to talk." Claire's voice carried that particular edge I'd learned to recognize over the past 5 years, ever since she'd married Derek and started speaking to me like I was the help. I set down my pruning shears and walked to the kitchen, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear. The morning light streamed through the window above the sink, illuminating the small stack of unpaid bills I'd been avoiding. Frank's life insurance had run out faster than I'd expected, and the catering business hadn't been the same since the big chains moved into town. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "It's about the vow renewal." She paused, and I could hear Derek's voice in the background, urgent and insistent. "We've decided to keep it small, really small. Just Derek and me, the pastor, and Emma." My hand tightened on the phone. Claire and Derek's 10-year vow renewal had been the only thing I'd looked forward to in months. Emma, my 9-year-old granddaughter, had been bubbling with excitement about wearing a new dress, about watching Mommy and Daddy get married again. Small? I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the same one where Claire had done homework, where Frank and I had planned menus and counted receipts, where I'd signed his death certificate with shaking hands. "Honey, you've been planning this for 8 months. You said—" "I know what I said." Her voice went sharp. "But Derek feels, we both feel it should be more intimate, private." The word hit me like a slap. Private. As if 50 years of loving this girl, of midnight fevers and school plays and wedding planning, could be dismissed with a single word. "Claire, I don't understand. Last week you asked me to make those petit fours you used to love. You said Emma was so excited for Grandma Rose to see—" "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. As if being uninvited to my only child's vow renewal was supposed to be easy. I stared at the kitchen wall, at the photo of Frank and me cutting the cake at our own wedding 47 years ago. He'd gotten frosting on his nose, and I was laughing so hard my veil had come loose. "Is this about the money?" The words came out before I could stop them. "Because if you need help with the costs—" "God, Mom, not everything is about money." But something in her voice told me I'd hit closer to the truth than she wanted to admit. "Look, we'll have a nice dinner after, okay? Just the family. Family." Apparently that word had new boundaries I hadn't been informed about. "What about Emma?" "She's been talking about this for weeks." Another pause. Longer this time. "Emma will understand." No, she wouldn't. Emma was 9 years old and had been practicing walking down an aisle with a basket of silk petals I'd helped her pick out. Emma had drawn pictures of all of us at the party, stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. "Claire, I think you should reconsider—" "Mom, the decision is made." Derek's voice came on the line, smooth and final. I'd never liked Derek Patterson. Not from the moment Claire brought him home 10 years ago, with his practiced smile and eyes that calculated the cost of everything in my living room. "We appreciate your understanding." Understanding. As if this was a business transaction gone wrong, not the systematic erasure of a grandmother from her family's most important moments. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, listening to the dial tone and the sound of my neighbor's lawnmower outside. The roses I'd been tending seemed to mock me through the window. All that careful cultivation, all that nurturing. And for what? My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Grandma Rose, only 10 more days until the big party. I can't wait to dance with you." I closed my eyes and felt something shift inside my chest, something that had been bending for years under the weight of small slights and forgotten invitations and Christmas dinners where I felt like a stranger in my own daughter's house. That something finally snapped. I picked up my pruning shears and walked back outside. The roses could wait. I had other gardens to tend to now, ones that required a different kind of cultivation altogether. As I stood there in the morning sun, a memory surfaced. Frank's voice the night before he died, weak but determined. "Rosie, don't let anyone make you small. You built this life, this business, this family. Don't let them forget what you're worth." I hadn't understood what he meant then. But standing in my garden, holding his pruning shears, watching a text from my granddaughter light up my phone with innocent joy, I finally did. Claire thought she could keep this private. She had no idea how public heartbreak could become when the right person decided to stop being quiet about it. 3 days passed before I found the real reason Claire didn't want me at her vow renewal. I'd spent those days in a strange state of clarity, the kind that comes after a fever breaks. Wednesday, I called my old accountant, Margaret Winters, and asked her to lunch. Thursday, I drove to the county courthouse and spent 2 hours in the records office, smiling sweetly at the young clerk who helped me navigate their computer system. Friday morning, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and a manila folder full of documents that told a story my daughter thought I'd never piece together. The Rosewood Manor, Derek's family's historic estate where the vow renewal was supposed to take place. The same venue that had been mysteriously double-booked for 3 other weddings this summer, forcing those families to scramble for alternatives at twice the cost. The same venue that Derek Patterson had quietly purchased 6 months ago through an LLC registered to his business partner. I stared at the property transfer documents, my coffee growing cold. My son-in-law wasn't just arrogant, he was running a con. And Claire, my sweet, naive Claire, either didn't know or didn't care that her husband was scamming desperate families out of their life savings. The front door chimed, and Emma's voice rang through the house. "Grandma." "Rose, are you home?" I quickly closed the folder and tucked it under a dish towel, just as my granddaughter bounded into the kitchen, still in her school uniform. Claire followed behind, looking harried and avoiding my eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry to just drop by, but my sitter canceled and I have a meeting." "Of course." I stood and kissed Emma's forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "We haven't had our Friday baking date in weeks." Emma's face lit up. "Can we make snickerdoodles? Please?" "Anything you want, Angel." Claire checked her watch, a new Cartier I didn't remember her owning. "I'll be back in 2 hours. Emma, be good for Grandma." She was halfway to the door when I called out. "Claire, how are the wedding plans coming along?" Her shoulders tensed. "Fine. Everything's fine. The venue is beautiful. Rosewood Manor, right?" I kept my voice light, conversational. "I drove by yesterday. Quite impressive." Emma looked up from the cookie jar she'd been exploring. "Daddy says it used to be a dump, but now it's super fancy and expensive." Claire spun around, color draining from her face. "Emma, we shouldn't talk about money. But Daddy said he made it fancy so other people would pay lots of money to—" "Emma!" Claire's voice cracked like a whip. My granddaughter's face crumpled, and I felt rage bubble up in my throat. "Claire Elizabeth McKenna." I used the voice that had once made her stop mid-tantrum at age 5. "Do not speak to this child that way in my house." For a moment, we stared at each other across my kitchen. Claire's mouth opened and closed like a fish, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered, kneeling beside Emma. "Mommy's just stressed about work. I didn't mean to yell." Emma nodded solemnly and hugged her mother, but I caught the way Claire's hands shook as she smoothed Emma's hair. My daughter was in deeper than I'd thought. After Claire left, I let Emma measure flour and crack eggs while I processed what I'd learned. Derek wasn't just excluding me from the wedding. He was using it as a showcase for his newest scam. Potential clients would see the successful renovation of Rosewood Manor and trust him with their own event venues, their own life savings. Grandma Rose? Emma's voice was small. Are you really not coming to Mommy and Daddy's party? I stopped stirring the cookie dough and looked at her. Really looked. She had Frank's green eyes and my stubborn chin, and right now she looked like a little girl trying to understand why the adults in her world were acting so strangely. What do you think about that, sweetheart? I think it's dumb. She said it matter-of-factly, the way children do. You're the best baker in the whole world, and you taught Mommy everything about parties. Why wouldn't they want you there? Out of the mouths of babes. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean they don't love you. Emma nodded, but her lower lip trembled. Daddy says we can't talk about the party at school anymore. He says it's not polite to brag. Another piece clicked into place. Derek was keeping the event quiet because he couldn't risk too much scrutiny. An elaborate vow renewal celebration at a venue he secretly owned would raise questions he couldn't answer. Emma, do you remember when Grandpa Frank got sick? She shook her head. She'd been too young. He taught me something important. Before he died, he said that when people try to make you smaller, you have two choices. You can shrink, or you can grow. What does that mean? I smiled and handed her the cookie scoop. It means sometimes, when people think they're shutting you out, they're actually giving you the best seat in the house. We spent the next hour baking in comfortable silence, and I watched Emma's natural joy return as she shaped imperfect cookies and licked batter from the spoon. When Claire returned to pick her up, I sent them home with a tin of snickerdoodles and a kiss for my granddaughter. Mom, Claire said quietly as Emma ran to the car. Thank you for watching her and for not making this harder. I touched her cheek gently. I love you, sweetheart. You know that, right? Her eyes filled with tears. I know. I love you too. After they left, I sat back down at my kitchen table and opened the manila folder again. Next to the property records, I spread out the business registration for Derek's LLC, the loan documents for the Rosewood Manor renovation, and a printout of news articles about families who'd been scammed by similar wedding venue schemes in neighboring counties. Margaret had done good work. She'd also given me something else. The business card of a young lawyer named Amy Chen who specialized in consumer fraud. She's hungry, Margaret had said with a wink, and she doesn't like bullies. I picked up my phone and dialed Amy's number. Ms. Chen, this is Rose McKenna. I have a story you might find interesting and a proposition that could make both our careers. As I waited for her to call me back, I walked to Frank's old desk in the den and pulled out a leather-bound address book that hadn't been opened in years. 50 years of catering had introduced me to a lot of people. Judges, reporters, city council members, health inspectors, other business owners who'd been burned by schemes like Derek's. People who remembered Rose and Frank McKenna, and who might be very interested to learn what Derek Patterson was really up to. I smiled and reached for a pen. Claire wanted to keep her vow renewal private. She was about to learn that some secrets have a way of making themselves public. Amy Chen turned out to be exactly what Margaret had promised. Hungry, smart, and completely unimpressed by Derek Patterson's polished veneer. We met Monday morning at a small cafe downtown, away from prying eyes and familiar faces. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a notebook that she filled with precise handwriting as I told my story. When I finished, she sat back and studied me with the kind of calculating look I'd seen Frank use when pricing a difficult catering job. Mrs. McKenna, what you're describing could constitute wire fraud, theft by deception, and violation of wedding vendor statutes. She tapped her pen against her notebook. But I have to ask, why come to me? Why not just warn your daughter and walk away? I sipped my coffee and considered how to explain the weight of 9 years watching Derek slowly isolate Claire from everyone who truly loved her. The missed birthday dinners because he'd planned a surprise weekend. The Christmas mornings where Emma opened gifts at our house alone because Derek's family had traditions. The way my daughter had stopped calling just to chat, stopped asking for advice, stopped being the girl who used to bake cookies in my kitchen while telling me about her dreams. Because this isn't just about money, I said finally. He's destroying my family from the inside out, and my daughter can't see it. Maybe she won't believe me if I tell her, but she'll have to believe a federal investigation. Amy's smile was razor thin. I like the way you think, but building a case takes time, and you said the vow renewal is in 7 days? 6 days. I pulled out a second folder I'd prepared. But I don't plan to wait for the justice system to save my granddaughter from growing up watching her father destroy families for profit. I spread out what I'd gathered over the weekend: business cards, phone numbers, and carefully handwritten notes. 50 years of catering had taught me that this town ran on relationships, and I just spent 3 days reactivating every connection Frank and I had ever made. Judge Morrison's daughter had her wedding reception ruined by a venue scam last year in Pittsburgh. Different company, same pattern. I pointed to his card. Tom Bradley from Channel 7 owes me a favor from when his son got arrested, and I catered the family meeting with lawyers, no questions asked. Sarah Evans at the Chamber of Commerce has been fighting venue fraud for 2 years since her niece got burned. Amy's eyebrows rose as she flipped through my notes. This is comprehensive. I didn't build a successful catering business by accident, honey. You learn people's pressure points when you're in their kitchens during their worst moments. I leaned back in my chair. Derek Patterson thinks he's playing chess with amateurs. He's about to discover he picked a fight with someone who's been feeding this town's power structure for half a century. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Grandma Rose, can you pick me up from school today? Mommy is at another meeting. Another meeting. Claire had been having a lot of those lately. I need to go, I told Amy, standing and gathering my folders. But I want you to start in filing whatever paperwork you need to file. In the meantime, I have some phone calls to make. Amy caught my arm as I turned to leave. Mrs. McKenna, be careful. If Derek realizes what you're doing before we have solid evidence, let me worry about Derek. I patted her hand. You just make sure that when this blows up, it lands exactly where it needs to. 20 minutes later, I was waiting outside Emma's elementary school, watching kids stream out the front doors in clusters of laughter and backpacks. Emma spotted me and ran over, her face lighting up the way it used to when she was smaller. Grandma Rose, you're here! She threw her arms around my waist. Mommy said you might not be able to come anymore because you're too busy. Too busy. Another lie to add to the growing pile. I'm never too busy for you, Angel. I buckled her into Frank's old sedan. The one Derek was always hinting I should trade in for something more appropriate for a woman my age. How was school? Good. We're learning about family trees and social studies. I drew you and Grandpa Frank on the big branch right next to Mommy and Daddy. She pulled a crumpled paper from her backpack, covered in careful crayon drawings. See? You're the roots because Mrs. Patterson says roots keep the whole tree strong. Mrs. Patterson. Different Patterson, surely. But the coincidence made me smile grimly. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Can I keep it? Of course. Oh, and guess what? Jason's mom said she might hire you to cater his birthday party because I told her you make the best cakes in the whole world. I glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror. Jason's mom knows I cater. She said she heard you used to do all the fancy parties in town before you got old. Emma's eyes widened. Before you retired. Sorry, Grandma. Before I got old. More likely, before Derek started spreading the word that Rose McKenna was past her prime, not reliable for important events. Another piece of his systematic campaign to erase me from my own community. Emma, what's your daddy been saying about the catering business? She squirmed in her seat. Just that you're retired now and people should use newer companies. He says old businesses can't keep up with modern expectations. The fury that rose in my chest was white-hot and familiar. Derek hadn't been content to steal my family. He'd been destroying my reputation too, cutting off any chance I might have had to rebuild financially after Frank's death. Grandma Rose, are you okay? Your hands look funny. I loosened my grip on the steering wheel and forced my voice to stay calm. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. We stopped at the grocery store, and I let Emma pick out ingredients for dinner while I made mental notes. 3 different people recognized me and mentioned they'd heard I wasn't taking new clients. The young woman at the deli counter looked confused when I asked about catering supplies. Oh, I thought you sold the business to Patterson Events? Patterson Events, Derek's company. By the time we got back to my house, I had a clearer picture of just how thoroughly Derek had been working to erase Rose McKenna from the local events industry. No wonder Claire had been having so many meetings. She was probably trying to clean up the mess Derek had made by spreading lies about my competence and reliability. Emma settled at the kitchen table with homework while I started dinner, but my mind was racing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I wanted. Rose McKenna, I was just thinking about you. Jim Morrison's voice boomed through the speaker. The judge had always been fond of Frank, and he'd never forgotten the elaborate retirement party I'd catered for him 5 years ago. How are you holding up? I'm well, Jim. Listen, I have a favor to ask and a story you need to hear. I spent 20 minutes explaining Derek's scheme while Emma worked on math problems, oblivious to the conversation that was about to change everything. When I finished, Jim was quiet for a long moment. Rose, if what you're telling me is true, it's true. I have documents. Then that son of a bitch has been laughing at all of us. My daughter Emily lost $8,000 to a venue scam in Pittsburgh last year. Same pattern you're describing. His voice had gone hard. What do you need? A warrant to search his business records and maybe a friendly word with Tom Bradley at Channel 7. Consider it done. But Rose, if this goes public, your daughter's going to get hurt too. I watched Emma erasing and rewriting the same math problem, her tongue poking out in concentration, completely trusting that the adults in her world would keep her safe. Jim, my daughter is already hurt. She just doesn't know it yet. After I hung up, Emma looked up from her homework. Grandma Rose, were you talking about Daddy? Why do you ask? Because you had your mad voice. The same one you used when that mean lady at the store said I couldn't use the bathroom. Smart girl. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Emma, do you remember what I told you about growing instead of shrinking? She nodded solemnly. Well, sometimes when you grow, other people don't like it very much. They might say things that hurt your feelings, or try to make you feel bad for standing up for yourself. Is that what's happening with Mommy and Daddy's party? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Amy Chen's name appeared on the screen. Mrs. McKenna, we have a problem. I just got a call from Derek Patterson's lawyer. He knows you've been asking questions. Emma was watching me with Frank's green eyes, waiting for an answer to her question. Outside, I could hear Derek's BMW pulling into my driveway. Hold on, Amy. I looked at my granddaughter and made a decision that would change everything. Emma, I need you to go to your room and stay there until I come get you. Grandma? Please, Angel. Trust me. As Emma's footsteps disappeared up the stairs, Derek's silhouette filled my front door window. He didn't knock, just turned the handle and walked in like he owned the place. Hello, Rose. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. We need to talk. I set my phone down carefully on the kitchen counter, keeping Amy on the line but muted. Derek stood in my entryway like he belonged there, his expensive suit a sharp contrast to the worn comfort of my home. He'd never bothered to knock before, but he'd never let himself in uninvited either. Claire's not here, I said, not moving from my position behind the kitchen island. The marble countertop felt solid under my palms, grounding me. I'm not here for Claire. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room with predatory precision. They lingered on the manila folders I'd forgotten to put away, still spread across the table where Emma had been doing homework. I'm here about your little investigation. I don't know what you mean. Derek laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Rose, please, don't insult my intelligence. Jim Morrison's secretary is married to my golf partner. Amy Chen filed a consultation request with the State Fraud Division this morning. You've been busy. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. You have. He moved closer, casual and confident. The question is, what exactly do you think you're accomplishing? Above us, I could hear Emma's footsteps pacing in her room. Good girl. Stay put. I'm not sure I follow. Of course you do. Derek reached the kitchen island and leaned against it, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. You're upset about the wedding invitation, I get it. But filing false reports with federal agencies? That's a federal crime, Rose. False reports. He was fishing, trying to see how much I actually knew. I wouldn't know anything about federal agencies, said. I'm just a retired caterer. Are you? His smile turned sharper. Because from what I hear, you've been making quite a few phone calls, spreading some very interesting stories about my business practices. People call to chat. Old friends check in. I can't help what they choose to discuss. Derek straightened and walked to the table where my folders lay open. I watched him flip through the property records, the business registrations, the loan documents. His face remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Impressive research, he said finally, though I'm not sure what you think it proves. I'm not trying to prove anything. No? He picked up the newspaper clipping about venue fraud in Pittsburgh, the one that mentioned Judge Morrison's daughter. Then what's this? Reading material. And the call to Channel 7? I shrugged. Tom Bradley's an old friend. We chatted about his son's new job. Derek set the clipping down and turned to face me fully. When he spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of civility. Let me be very clear, Rose. I don't know what fantasy you've constructed in your head, but I'm running a legitimate business. Rosewood Manor is a beautiful venue that's brought joy to dozens of families. If you continue spreading lies about me or my company, I'll sue you for slander so fast your head will spin. Lies? I tilted my head, genuinely curious. What lies would those be? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Actually, I don't. Could you be more specific? For the first time since he'd walked in, Derek looked uncertain. He'd come here expecting to intimidate a confused old woman, and instead, he was facing someone who refused to be rattled. The implications, the suggestions you've been making about how I conduct business. I haven't made any suggestions. I've just been sharing facts with old friends. Facts. He spat the word like it tasted bitter. You don't know anything about facts, don't I? I walked to Frank's old desk in the corner and pulled out a thin folder I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Let me share a few facts with you, Derek. I spread out the documents I'd been holding in reserve, bank records that Margaret had helped me obtain through perfectly legal channels, showing the flow of money from Derek's LLC to his personal accounts, wedding deposits that had been transferred out within days of being received, a pattern of financial behavior that painted a very clear picture. Derek's face went pale. Where did you get those? Public records are wonderful things, especially when you know where to look. He stepped toward me, and for the first time, I saw the real Derek Patterson, not the polished facade he showed Claire, but the cold, calculating man underneath. You have no idea what you're messing with. I smiled and moved closer to him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October air. Do you know what 50 years of running a business in this town teaches you, Derek? He didn't answer. It teaches you that bullies always make the same mistake. They assume that being loud means being strong, that intimidation equals power. I gestured around my kitchen, at the photos of Frank and Claire and Emma, at the evidence of a life built on genuine relationships and honest work. But power isn't about making people afraid of you. It's about making people trust you. And trust, once lost, is impossible to buy back. Derek's jaw twitched. Claire trusts me. Does she? Or does she just not know who she's really married to yet? You're trying to destroy my marriage. I'm trying to save my daughter from making the biggest mistake of her life. There's a difference. We stared at each other across my kitchen, and I could see him recalculating, trying to figure out what he'd walked into. This wasn't the scared, grieving widow he'd expected to find. What do you want? He asked. Finally. I want you to tell Claire the truth about your business. I want you to return the money you've stolen from those families, and I want you to stay away from my granddaughter. Derek laughed, but it sounded forced. Or what? Or nothing. You'll destroy yourself without any help from me. I gathered up the bank records and slipped them back into their folder. The thing about cons, Derek, is that they only work when nobody's paying attention. But people are paying attention now. Who? Your decrepit old friends? That hack reporter from Channel 7? Judge Morrison? District Attorney Williams? Senator Kowalski's chief of staff? I ticked off names on my fingers, watching Derek's face change with each one. Amazing how many people remember Rose and Frank McKenna when you've spent 50 years feeding their families during the most important moments of their lives. Derek's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it reflexively. His face went ashen. Problem? I asked sweetly. I have to go. He was already moving toward the door. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Give my love to Claire, I called after him. Tell her I'm looking forward to seeing her soon. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I waited until his BMW disappeared down the street before calling up the stairs. Emma, you can come down now, sweetheart. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face worried. Grandma Rose? Was Daddy mad about something? Your daddy had some business to take care of. Nothing for you to worry about. But as Emma came down the stairs, I caught her looking toward the front door with an expression too old for her 9-year-old face. She'd heard more than I'd intended. Grandma? She said quietly. Are you and Daddy fighting? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Amy Chen's number flashed on the screen, and her voice was breathless with excitement when I answered. Mrs. McKenna, you're not going to believe this. Derek Patterson just tried to wire transfer $200,000 out of his business account to an offshore account in the Caymans. The bank flagged it and called the fraud division. I looked at Emma, who was watching me with Frank's intelligent green eyes, and made a decision that would change everything for all of us. Amy, how quickly can you get a court order to freeze his assets? Give me 2 hours. Make it 1. And call Jim Morrison. Tell him it's time. As I hung up the phone, Emma tugged at my sleeve. Grandma Rose? What's happening? I knelt down to her level and took her small hands in mine. Emma, do you remember what I told you about growing instead of shrinking? She nodded. Well, sweetheart, your grandma just grew about 10 feet taller. Claire arrived at my house at 7:30 that evening, 20 minutes after Amy Chen called to confirm that Derek's assets had been frozen. My daughter's face was blotchy from crying, her usually perfect makeup smeared, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd had on that morning, something that never happened in Derek's world of appearances. Emma was upstairs getting ready for bed, and I could hear her humming while she brushed her teeth, blissfully unaware that her world was about to shift on its axis. Mom, Claire's voice cracked as she stood in my doorway. I need to talk to you. I stepped aside to let her in, noting the way her hands shook as she set down her purse. She looked fragile in a way I hadn't seen since she was small, and came to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. Derek told me you've been investigating him. She sat heavily at the kitchen table, in the same chair where she used to do homework. He said you filed some kind of fraud report. I shared some concerns with the appropriate authorities, I said carefully, setting a cup of tea in front of her. That's not quite the same thing. Mom, what did you do? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of careful distance and unspoken grievances. I sat across from her and studied my daughter's face, really looked at her for the first time in months. She was too thin, I realized. There were dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide, and her wedding ring looked loose on her finger. Claire, how much do you know about Derek's business practices? I know he works hard. I know he's built something successful. But her voice lacked conviction, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. Do you know where the money for Rosewood Manor came from? She looked up sharply. He got investors, business partners. He got deposits from families planning weddings, deposits that were supposed to be held in escrow until their events. That's not true. I reached for the folder I'd shown Derek earlier and spread out the bank records. Claire, look at these numbers. Really look at them. She stared at the documents for a long moment, her face growing paler with each line item. This could be anything: equipment purchases, renovation costs. $200,000 transferred to an offshore account this afternoon. I pointed to Amy's notes from the bank's fraud alert. What kind of renovation requires money in the Cayman Islands? Claire's hands flew to her mouth. Oh God, Mom, I didn't know. Didn't you? No, I swear I didn't know. She was crying now, real tears that came from somewhere deep and desperate. I thought, he said the business was doing well. He said we could afford nice things because he was good at his job. The Cartier watch? Anniversary gift. He said I deserved beautiful things. The new car? Business expense. He said clients expected a certain image. Each answer came out smaller than the last, and I watched my daughter crumble as she realized how thoroughly she'd been played. Derek hadn't just stolen from strangers. He'd stolen her innocence, her ability to trust her own judgment. Mom, what am I going to do? She looked at me with the same desperate expression she'd worn at 16 when she'd wrecked Frank's truck and was afraid to tell him. Emma, the house, everything we have. We'll figure it out, I said, reaching across the table to take her hands. We always do. But the wedding, the vow renewal is in 5 days. All those people, all that money. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Claire, what people? I thought you said it was just family. She went very still. It is family. What aren't you? Telling me? For a moment I thought she might lie again. Then her shoulders sagged in defeat. There are 300 people coming, Mom. Derek invited every business contact he's ever made, every client, everyone who might invest in his next project. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. He said it was networking. He said it was smart business. 300 people. Derek wasn't just celebrating his marriage. He was using it as a sales opportunity, a chance to find new victims for whatever scheme he was planning next. Claire, you have to cancel it. I can't. The deposits, the vendors, the contracts. She was spiraling now, panic setting in. Derek will kill me if I cancel. All his business partners will be there. Their wives, people who could make or break his career. Honey, Derek's career is already broken. The FBI froze his accounts this afternoon. She stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. The FBI? Wire fraud is a federal crime. When you steal money from multiple families across state lines, the federal government takes an interest. This isn't happening. Claire stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This can't be happening. Derek he's difficult sometimes, but he's not a criminal. Claire, no! She spun around, and for a moment I saw the fury that had been building under years of careful control. You did this. You couldn't stand that I was happy, that I'd built something without you, so you destroyed it. Accusation hit like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. Is that what you think? That you were happy? I was fine before you started interfering. Were you? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like you haven't slept well in months. You've lost weight. You barely call. And Emma asks me constantly why Mommy is always sad. I'm not sad. I'm busy. I have responsibilities. To whom? To Derek? To his fake business and his stolen money? To my family. I'm your family. The words, came out louder than I'd intended, and the house went quiet. Even Emma's humming upstairs had stopped. I'm your family, and you uninvited me from the most important celebration of your life because your husband told you to. Claire's face crumpled again. He said you were getting old and embarrassing. He said successful people needed to make hard choices about who they associated with. Each word was a knife, but I made myself listen to all of it. He said I needed to choose between the past and the future, between you and him. And you chose him. I chose what I thought was best for Emma. She was sobbing now, the kind of broken crying that comes from the bottom of the soul. I wanted her to have everything I didn't have growing up. Private school, nice clothes, a house in the right neighborhood. I wanted her to never worry about money the way we did after Dad got sick. The way we did. As if Frank's illness had been a choice. As if the medical bills and insurance gaps and slow death of our catering business had been a personal failing rather than a tragedy that had happened to all of us. Claire, we never went without, didn't we? She turned on me with surprising fierceness. Do you think I didn't notice the unpaid bills on the kitchen counter? The way you stopped buying name-brand groceries? The way Dad kept working even when he could barely stand because you were too proud to ask for help? I opened my mouth to defend us, to explain that we'd done the best we could. But Emma's voice interrupted from the top of the stairs. Mommy? Why are you yelling at Grandma Rose? Claire and I both froze. My granddaughter stood on the landing in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand, looking between us with confused worry. Come here, Angel, I said softly, and Emma padded down the stairs to crawl into my lap. She was getting too big for this, but tonight she felt small and fragile against my chest. Are you and Mommy fighting about Daddy? Again? She asked. Again, as if this was a conversation that happened regularly. Claire sank back into her chair, looking defeated. Emma, sweetheart, there are some grown-up things happening that are complicated. Is Daddy in trouble? The question was so direct, so innocent, that it cut through all our careful evasions. Emma had heard more than we'd realized, understood more than we'd given her credit for. Claire looked at me helplessly, and I made a decision that would either rebuild our family or destroy it completely. Yes, sweetheart, I said gently. Your daddy made some choices that hurt other people, and now he has to face the consequences. Are we going to be okay? Before I could answer, headlights swept across the front window. A black sedan with government plates pulled into my driveway, followed by 2 police cars. Claire went white. Mom, what did you do? But I was looking at Emma, at the trust in her green eyes, at the complete faith that the adults in her world would keep her safe no matter what happened. We're going to be fine, I told her, and for the first time in months, I meant it. The doorbell rang, sharp and official, and I knew our time for quiet conversation was over. I handed Emma to Claire and walked to the front door, smoothing my hair and straightening my shoulders the way Frank had taught me before every important catering event. Present yourself with dignity, Rosie. People remember how you carry yourself when everything falls apart. Agent Sarah Martinez was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Behind her stood 2 local police officers I recognized, Danny Walsh, whose wedding reception we'd catered 8 years ago, and Maria Santos, whose daughter's quinceañera had been one of our last big events before Frank got sick. Mrs. McKenna, I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with Derek Patterson. He's not here, I said calmly. But you're welcome to come in and... Wait. I suspect he'll be along shortly. Danny Walsh caught my eye and nodded slightly. Good. Having familiar faces here would help Emma feel safer. As the agent stepped inside, Claire stood up with Emma still in her arms. My granddaughter's eyes were wide, taking in the uniforms and badges with the sharp intelligence that missed nothing. Mommy, Emma whispered, are those policemen here about Daddy? Before Claire could answer, another set of headlights swept across the window. Derek's BMW screeched into the driveway behind the government cars, and I watched through the front window as he sat in his car for a long moment, calculating his options. Mrs. Patterson? Agent Martinez addressed Claire gently. We're going to need to speak with your husband about some irregularities in his business accounts. I don't know anything about his business, Claire stammered. We understand that, ma'am. But we'll need to verify some information, and we have a warrant to search your home. And his office. Emma's grip tightened on her mother's neck. Mommy, what's a warrant? It's a paper that says the police can look for things, I explained quietly. When you lose a toy and we look through your whole room to find it. The front door opened and Derek stepped inside, his politician smile firmly in place despite the sweat on his forehead. Officers, there seems to be some misunderstanding. Mr. Derek Patterson? Agent Martinez stepped forward. You're under arrest for wire, fraud, money laundering, and theft by deception. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Emma made a small sound of distress, and I immediately moved to Claire's side. Emma, come to Grandma, I said softly, and she transferred to my arms without question, burying her face in my shoulder. This is ridiculous, Derek said, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. "I demand to speak to my lawyer." "You'll have that opportunity," Agent Martinez said, nodding to the officers. As they read, "Derek, his rights," his eyes found mine across the room. "This is your doing," he said, his mask finally slipping completely. "You vindictive old—" "Watch your language," Danny Walsh interrupted firmly. "There's a child present." Derek's gaze shifted to Emma in my arms, then to Claire, who was watching the arrest with a mixture of horror and something that might have been relief. "Claire, call Morrison and Associates. Tell them I need representation immediately." But even as he said it, his eyes held a desperate uncertainty, as if he was finally realizing how completely his world had collapsed. "I can't," Claire whispered. "I don't have access to our accounts." "You never gave me the passwords." For a moment, Derek looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd forgotten that his careful control of their finances meant Claire couldn't help him, even if she wanted to. "The Children's College Fund?" he asked desperately. "Was never in my name," Claire said, her voice growing stronger. "None of it was ever in my name." As the officers led Derek toward the door, he looked back one last time. "Claire, this is all a misunderstanding. I'll be home tomorrow and we'll straighten this out. The vow renewal is still on. Everything is going to be fine." The delusion in his voice was almost pitiful. Even now, facing federal charges, he believed he could charm his way out of the consequences. After the door closed behind them, my living room felt cavernous and quiet. Emma pulled back from my shoulder to look at her mother. "Is Daddy coming home tomorrow?" Claire's face crumpled. "No, sweetheart, I don't think he is." Agent Martinez, who had stayed behind to speak with us, sat down carefully in Frank's old armchair. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that our investigation shows no evidence of your involvement in your husband's activities. However, there will be asset recovery proceedings. The house, the cars, any accounts in both your names. We're going to lose everything," Claire said hollowly. "Not everything," I said firmly. "You have family, you have skills, you have a beautiful daughter who needs her mother to be strong." Agent Martinez pulled out a business card and handed it to Claire. "There are victim assistance programs that can help with housing and legal aid. Your husband stole from 17 different families across 3 states. The federal court will do everything possible to recover those funds, but the process takes time." 17 families. The number hit me like a physical blow. 17 celebrations ruined. 17 dreams crushed by Derek's greed. After Agent Martinez left, Claire and I sat in the kitchen while Emma played quietly in the living room with toys I kept here for her visits. My daughter looked smaller somehow, as if Derek's arrest had deflated something inside her. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said finally, "about the wedding, about everything I said to you, about believing him instead of trusting you." "Honey, you don't need to apologize for loving someone, even when they don't deserve it." "But I was so awful to you. I chose him over you, over Emma's relationship with you, over everything Dad taught me about family." I reached across the table and took her hands. "Your father taught you to be loyal and trusting. Those aren't bad qualities, even when they're taken advantage of. How did you know? How did you see what I couldn't?" I considered the question seriously. "Because I wasn't in love with him. Because I wasn't living in his house, wearing his gifts, trying to be the person he wanted me to be. Sometimes the people who love us most can see dangers we're blind to. What am I going to do? I don't have anywhere to go, no job, no money of my own. You're going to come home," I said simply. "You and Emma are going to come home, and we're going to figure this out together. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you." I squeezed her hands. "This house has been too quiet without you two in it." From the living room came the sound of Emma's voice, soft and uncertain. "Grandma Rose? Can you come here, please?" I found her sitting on the floor with her crayons and the family tree picture she'd drawn at school, carefully erasing something. "What are you working on, Angel?" "I'm taking Daddy off the tree," she said matter-of-factly. "He made Mommy cry too much, and he was mean to you. Trees are supposed to be safe places." The simple wisdom of it took my breath away. I knelt beside her on the floor. "You know what? You're absolutely right. But Emma, What happened with your daddy isn't your fault. You know that, right? She nodded solemnly. Mommy explained that sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and kids don't have to carry the heavy feelings about it. I looked back toward the kitchen, where Claire was visible through the doorway, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. She was going to be all right. They both were. Grandma Rose? Emma looked up at me, with those serious, green eyes. Are we still having a party on Saturday? Saturday. The day Derek's vow renewal was supposed to happen. 300 guests expecting a celebration at a venue that would likely be seized by federal marshals. What kind of party would you like to have? I asked. Emma considered this carefully. A party where people bring food to share, and kids can play, and nobody has to wear uncomfortable shoes. That sounds perfect, I said, pulling her onto my lap. How about we call it a family reunion instead? Can I invite Jason from school? And Mrs. Patterson from next door? Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor whose grandchild was in Emma's class, who'd asked about catering services before Derek's reputation campaign had shut that down. Of course, sweetheart. We'll invite everyone who wants to celebrate families that take care of each other. As Emma went back to her drawing, now adding new branches to her family tree, I thought about Derek's guests receiving cancellation calls tomorrow. Some would be confused, some angry, some relieved they wouldn't have to pretend to enjoy celebrating a marriage they'd probably seen through long before Claire had. But some of them, the ones who remembered what Rose and Frank McKenna had built in this town, the ones who valued substance over show, would understand exactly what had happened here. And just maybe they'd remember that the best celebrations weren't about impressing people with how much money you could spend. They were about gathering the people who loved you enough to tell you the truth, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Saturday morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of October day that made everything look like a postcard. From my kitchen window, I could see Emma in the backyard, directing Claire in the hanging of string lights between the oak trees Frank had planted when we first bought this house. It had been 5 days since Derek's arrest, and the transformation in both of them was remarkable. Claire moved with purpose now, no longer the careful, measured steps of someone afraid to make the wrong choice. Emma's laughter rang clear and frequent, the sound of a child who no longer had to tiptoe around fragile adult emotions. My phone had been ringing all morning with calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. Word traveled fast in our town, and the story of Derek Patterson's spectacular downfall had spread through the community like wildfire. Rose, Margaret Winter's voice was warm with satisfaction. Have you seen the morning news? I glanced at the newspaper folded on my counter, its headline visible even from across the room. Local businessman charged in multi-state wedding fraud. Below it, a smaller story. FBI recovers $400,000 for scammed families. I saw it, I said, pouring coffee into my good china cups, the ones I'd been saving for special occasions that never seemed to come. They're calling you a hero. Tom Bradley ran a whole segment last night about how community members can spot and report fraud. Hero. The word sat strangely on my shoulders. I'd just been a grandmother trying to protect her family. Margaret, did you see the part about the venue, Rosewood Manor? Seized by federal marshals yesterday afternoon. They found 3 more fake contracts in Derek's office. Families who'd put down deposits for weddings that were never going to happen. I closed my eyes, thinking about those families. Young, couples who'd saved for months, parents who'd scraped together money for their children's dream weddings, all of it stolen by a man who saw their joy as nothing more than an opportunity. But here's the interesting part, Margaret continued. Judge Morrison called me this morning. Apparently, several of Derek's victims have been asking about alternative caterers for their rescheduled events. Margaret, Rose McKenna, you built the best catering business this town has ever seen. Just because you retired doesn't mean you have to stay retired. Before I could respond, Emma burst through the back door, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Grandma Rose, Mrs. Santos is here, and she brought her whole family. And Jason's mom brought flowers, and there are cars I don't recognize in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see them arriving. Neighbors, old clients, friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Word about our impromptu family reunion had spread, and people were coming not out of curiosity about Derek's scandal, but because they remembered what Rose and Frank McKenna's gatherings used to feel like. "Emma, go tell Mommy we'll need more chairs from the garage." As my granddaughter ran back outside, I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked different somehow, straighter, more solid. The woman staring back at me wasn't the confused widow Derek had tried to intimidate. She was someone who'd remembered her own strength just in time to save her family. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Amy Chen holding a bottle of wine and wearing a genuine smile. "Mrs. McKenna, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I heard about your gathering and I wanted to thank you in person." "Thank me?" "Your information led to the arrest of someone who'd been running this scam across multiple states for 3 years. 17 families are getting their money back because you paid attention and spoke up. 17 families. Young couples who could reschedule their weddings, parents who wouldn't have to explain to their children why the celebration was canceled, dreams that could be rebuilt instead of buried. Amy, can I ask you something? What happens to Derek now? Federal fraud charges carry serious time. With the evidence we gathered, his lawyer is already talking about a plea deal. He'll serve at least 5 years, probably more. 5 years. Emma would be 14 when he got out. Old enough to understand what had happened. Old enough to make her own choices about whether she wanted a relationship with the man who'd tried to steal her mother's life. As Amy left to join the gathering in the backyard, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. McKenna? This is Linda Morrison, Judge Morrison's daughter. I wanted to call and thank you." Linda, the young woman whose wedding had been ruined by a venue scam in Pittsburgh. "I saw the news about Derek Patterson, and my father told me you were the one who brought his operation to light. The man who scammed us was part of the same network. Because of your investigation, the FBI was able to connect the cases. I'm so sorry about your wedding, dear." "Thank you, but that's not why I'm calling." Her voice grew stronger. "My fiancé and I are planning a small ceremony next month to make it official. Nothing fancy, just close family and friends. My father said you might be interested in catering it." I looked out the back window at Claire, who was laughing with neighbors while Emma showed off her improved cartwheel technique. My daughter caught my eye and waved, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in years. Peace. "Linda, I'd be honored." The afternoon passed in a blur of conversations and shared food and children playing between the oak trees. People brought dishes to pass, stories to share, and a sense of community that Derek's artificial networking events could never have achieved. Judge Morrison arrived with his wife, bringing a card signed by half the courthouse staff. Tom Bradley came with his camera crew, not for a story, but because his family had always been invited to McKenna gatherings. Maria Santos brought her grandmother's tamale recipe and the news that 3 families from her church were asking about catering services. As the sun began to set, painting the backyard in shades of gold and amber, I found myself standing beside Claire near the garden where Frank's roses were preparing for winter. "Mom, I have something to tell you." She was holding a business card, worn from being handled. "I called the community college yesterday. They have a program for displaced spouses, business skills, computer training, accounting. I start Monday." "Claire, that's wonderful." "And Emma loves her new school here in the neighborhood. She's already made friends with 3 kids on our street." Claire paused, watching her daughter organize a complicated game involving Emma's toy horses and several pine cones. "I think we're going to be okay." "I know you are." "I also wanted to tell you, I've been thinking about Dad's old recipes, the ones he never wrote down because he said they were more art than science." I smiled, remembering Frank's habit of cooking by instinct, adjusting seasonings by taste and smell rather than measurement. "I remember some of them," Claire continued. "Not perfectly, but enough to start. If you wanted to get back into catering, even small events, you wouldn't have to do it alone." Before I could respond, Emma appeared at my elbow, tugging on my sweater. "Grandma Rose? Mrs. Patterson from next door wants to know if you can cater her anniversary party in December, and Jason's mom wants to talk to you about his birthday, and that nice lady with the pretty hair said she needs someone for her daughter's engagement party." I looked around the backyard at the faces of people who'd driven across town on a Saturday afternoon to celebrate with us. Not because we were wealthy or important or connected to the right social circles, but because we were family. Blood family, chosen. Derek had tried to turn Claire's life into a performance, a carefully staged show designed to impress strangers and extract money from victims. He'd nearly succeeded in erasing me from my own daughter's story, in cutting Emma off from the roots that anchored her to something real and lasting. But roots, I'd learned, are stronger than they appear. They grow deep and spread wide, and they remember what matters even when the people above ground forget. "Emma," I said, pulling my granddaughter close, "why don't you help me start a list?" As the stars began to appear above our heads and the string lights twinkled between Frank's oak trees, I realized that Derek Patterson had given me something he never intended, the chance to remember who Rose McKenna really was. Not Derek's inconvenient mother-in-law, not a grieving widow fading into irrelevance, not an old woman whose time had passed. I was a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman who'd spent 50 years building something real and lasting in this community. I was someone worth fighting for, worth standing up for, worth defending. As the last guests were leaving, Emma climbed into my lap on the porch swing Frank had installed the summer before he died. "Grandma Rose, today was better than any fancy party would have been." "Why's that, sweetheart?" "Because everyone here actually likes us," she said matter-of-factly. "At Daddy's parties, people always looked like they were pretending." Out of the mouths of babes. "Emma, do you miss your daddy?" She considered this seriously, the way she did all important questions. "I miss the daddy I thought he was. But I don't miss being scared all the time that someone was going to be mad." I held her tighter. This wise little girl who'd navigated an impossible situation with more grace than most adults could manage. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "Not for a long time, Angel. And when he does, you'll be old enough to decide for yourself what kind of relationship you want with him. Will you help me decide?" "If you want me to." "I do." She yawned and snuggled closer. "Grandma Rose, can we do this every year? Have a family reunion party where everyone brings food and kids can play and nobody has to wear uncomfortable shoes?" I looked through the screen door at Claire, who was washing dishes in my kitchen sink, and humming an old song Frank used to sing. At the string lights that would stay up all winter now because they made the backyard look magical. At the leftover food that would feed us for days and remind us of the people who cared enough to share their recipes with us. "Every year," I promised, "for as long as we have family to celebrate." And as Emma dozed in my arms, I made a silent promise to Frank, wherever he was watching from. I grew, my love. Just like you taught me. I grew 10 feet tall.